Elise, an ambulance doctor, was in a hurry to get on a call. Today, she was on shift with her husband, Philip, who was the ambulance driver. He spent the whole trip resenting the fact that the head doctor refused to put him in a new car, and it went to another driver. He cursed the government, the people, the country, and everyone else who, in his opinion, was preventing him from living a good life. Elise didn't listen to her husband. She was thinking about how broken and tired she felt. It was a good thing tomorrow was a day off. She so wanted to sleep it off, lie in front of the TV, take a walk in the park in the evening, maybe sit on a bench with her favorite book. Elise didn't want to see anyone because tomorrow would be the anniversary of that terrible day, which she awaited with a heavy feeling every year. Here we are. There's the driveway, Philip burst into her thoughts so unceremoniously that she flinched. Go ahead and I'll turn around and park in front of the house. Elise went out silently and went up to the right floor. The door to the apartment was open. An old man came out to meet her and waved. Come here, she's over here. I'm actually a neighbor. I live across the street. I haven't seen Chloe in days. I wondered if anything had happened. She's a lonely old lady after all. I called a policeman. He opened the door. We saw her lying on the kitchen floor. Well, we moved her to her bed and we called you. The talkative old man wanted to say something else, but Elise asked him to leave. I need to examine the patient, and you rest for a while. I'll call you later. She shut the door behind him, glad that she had kicked him out so quickly, and now he would not disturb her with his chatter. And she turned to the old woman. Elise stood and stared at her, not averting her gaze. A scream burst from her chest, and the woman, afraid that she would not be able to contain it, covered her mouth with her hand. Before her, with her eyes closed, lay the one who had broken, crushed, trampled her whole life, Chloe, Alan's mother, her former mother-in-law. Once upon a time, Elise, a first-year medical student, met a guy named Alan. He came from a wealthy family. His mother was in private business. His father was the dean at Elise's university. Alan came to his father's house one day, and that's where he saw her for the first time. They met, chatted for a while, and then broke up. But the next day, Alan met her with a bouquet of flowers and asked her out. They met for 2 long years and fell in love so much that they couldn't stand even a short separation. One thing saddened Alan. His parents did not want to acknowledge Elise, considering her unworthy of their son. Chloe in particular tried. She was ready to do anything to separate them, and she began by instigating her husband to interfere with Elise's studies. The professors didn't want to risk their jobs over a student who didn't please the dean in some way. And when she was in her 4th year, she was expelled for misconduct she had not committed. Elise cried in Alan's arms, and the guy comforted her as best he could. Then, for the first time, he stayed at her house all night without coming home. In the morning, the doorbell woke them up. On the doorstep stood Chloe. She immediately slapped her son on the cheek, screaming that she hadn't slept all night, not knowing where he was. What do you think you're doing? Marry a boy through your bed to yourself? Tomorrow you'll start screaming that you're pregnant and demand a wedding. Well, you ain't getting one. Do you understand? It's not enough that you were expelled from the university, but I'll get you kicked out of town too. Why do you hate me so much? What have I done to you? Elise could not hold back her tears. But Chloe did not answer her and turned to her son. Get dressed quickly. Let's get out of here. Come on, Mom. I need to have a serious talk with you too, Alan replied. Elise was left alone, but soon Alan returned and reassured her. He told her the matter was settled. He set his mother conditions. Either he gets married or he leaves home for good. Mother eventually agreed. The next week, Elise was reinstated to the university, and 6 months later, she became Alan's wife. It seemed that everything would be all right now, but Chloe didn't think to give up. The young couple lived at her house for the first time, and she wouldn't let her daughter-in-law live in peace, picking on her for every reason and for no reason at all. Elise couldn't stand it and left with Alan to a rented apartment. Then Chloe began to come and torment the girl there. Things started to hurt and quarrel between Alan and Elise. He defended his mother, thinking she was just inept at taking care of them. And Elise realized that her mother-in-law was just out to get her. After finishing her studies, Elise became pregnant. One day, she happened to run into a former classmate on the street and talk to him. They were chatting nicely, laughing and reminiscing about their recent studies, when suddenly Elise saw that Chloe was watching her from across the street. She was watching her and talking to someone on the phone. In the evening, Elise was in for a big scandal. Alan shouted at her and reproached her with almost treason. "Come to your senses, Alan. I'm expecting your baby. How can you accuse me of that?" tried to argue Elise. "And that's the big question, whose baby it is." The husband wouldn't let up. "Alan, how dare you say that?" The girl was shocked at her husband's words. But he was winded by his mother, throwing tantrums on his wife. Elise's life had turned to hell. She hoped everything would change with the birth of her son. But a week after giving birth, she found a DNA test that Alan had done in secret from her. Then she packed her bags, took the baby, and left for the country, to her grandmother's old house, which she inherited. She understood that she would not have a normal life with Alan. He had changed a lot, had become different, petty, and spiteful. And after she left, he became addicted to alcohol. Several times he came to Elise and her son, asking for forgiveness, burst into tears, and promised to stop drinking. But then he broke off again. The last time he came over very drunk. He tried to hug her and her 1-year-old son. Elise went to get a neighbor to help escort her ex-husband out. When she returned, she saw her son in the front seat of the car. Elise cried out loudly, but the car had already sped forward, leaving behind a cloud of dust. The unhappy mother floundered, not knowing what to do. 2 hours later, the police called her. "Your husband died in a car accident. He overturned his car." She was shocked and immediately asked, "And my son? My son? He was in the car with his father." "We're sorry, the car burned to the ground." For 2 weeks, Elise was on the verge of losing her mind. The doctors, colleagues saved her, kept her from dying, though she begged them to. After a while, she went to the cemetery, found her husband's grave, and stood with her forehead pressed against the cross. "What now?" heard Chloe's voice behind her. "You should have repented before. Now it's gone." "Where is my son buried?" Elise asked her in a muffled voice. "Why not near?" "I ordered them put in the same grave. No baby should lie alone," Chloe replied sadly. Elise crawled to the ground with a groan. When she got up, Chloe wasn't there. And so now Elise stood over the dying old woman and could not calm down. Finally, she pulled herself together and did what was necessary. The injection helped, and soon Chloe opened her eyes. She stared into Elise's face for a long time. At last she recognized her, and in a faint voice in which the former hatred was evident, she stretched out. "You again. Let's not remember the past. You'll feel better now, and we'll take you to the hospital." "Easier. Soon it'll be easy for me, and you will still live. You've killed us all, and you're happy." "What are you talking about? My son died that day, you know?" "I understand. Mine too. If you only knew how much I hate you for that." "But what does that have to do with me?" "You were always unworthy of my son. How I wanted to get rid of you, and here is the mockery. I even have to die in your presence." "Don't talk. You can't." "Are you going to forbid it?" "All right, you never would have found out about it, but since God brought you here, I have to answer to him anyway. You took my son, and I took your son, and I don't regret it." "Chloe, why are you starting again? They're already gone. You just have to deal with it somehow." "Shut up," Chloe shouted at her abruptly and rudely. "He's alive, your son. Alan came with him to my old apartment. He left him with me and came to get you, but he didn't make it. I wanted to give you Tony, but then I changed my mind. My son is dead because of you. You drove him to his grave. So I wanted to get back at you. You weren't at the funeral, and that same day I dropped him off at the orphanage. I couldn't raise him because he's your son, and you were like an enemy to me." Elise could not believe her ears. "What? What are you saying? How? Where?" She didn't realize what she was doing, shaking the old woman by the shoulders. "Where's my son? What orphanage?" Weakening, the old woman leaned back on her pillow, her eyes slowly closed, and her lips let out one last sigh. Chloe died. Elise did everything that had to be done in such cases. Then she ran to her husband's car. "Alive! My son is alive!" She cried and laughed, and Philip looked at her, not understanding. Elise was confused and interrupted herself. She told him everything. "You see? You just have to find that shelter. She couldn't take him far. Philip, can you imagine? I'll see my son soon." For several days, Elise was not herself. She had checked all the orphanages in the area. All day long, she drove around the orphanages looking for her son, but she was rejected everywhere. "No such child was admitted on the dates you mentioned," she was told by another shelter. But Elise did not give up. There was one last orphanage left, and that was where she intended to go early in the morning. It was far away, and she asked her husband to take her there by car. "You know what?" Philip suddenly told her. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither should you. Even if the old woman hasn't fooled you, the kid's all grown up. It's been, 5 years? Orphanage kids aren't like regular kids. You'll have a hard time with him. Anyway, you have to choose. Him or me. I'm sick of it. One minute you're depressed, the next you're looking for a son. I need a wife, not a tracker. Why do you need a son from your ex-husband when you won't give birth to me? My mother told me, don't marry a divorced woman, and I foolishly married. So what's your choice?" Elise looked at her husband with a determined look. "I choose my son. This conversation is over. You can leave now." And Philip went off to pack his things. In the morning, she drove to her son, tapping her fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. She had been on the road for about 5 hours when, suddenly, the car swerved violently down the road. Elise failed to cope with the control, and the car went into a ditch, rolled on its side. The woman soon felt someone trying to help her get out. Strangely enough, she was not hurt at all. She was only very frightened. When she managed to get out, she saw a man of about 40 years in age in front of her. He asked, "Is she all right?" And getting an affirmative answer, he called someone on the phone and asked them to come over. While they were waiting for help, Elise learned that her rescuer's name was Antonio. The man's friends who showed up quickly flipped Elise's car onto its wheels and towed her to Antonio's car. He explained to her where he lived and that her car would be at his place for the time being. He was just checking to see if she was okay. "And that's where you need to go. Martin will take you. Look, Martin, you get the girl there and back safely," he admonished his friend. Elise thanked her savior and limped slightly to Martin's car. Half an hour later, Elise walked into the orphanage, but soon she was out, not trying to keep the tears from flowing from her eyes. Tony wasn't there. He had been adopted years ago. The trail of her son was lost forever to Elise. She sobbed all the way and didn't notice when Martin took her to some village. He stopped at a large house and pointed out to his passenger. "There, your savior lives." Antonio appeared on the threshold and opened the doors to her hospitably. "You're just in time. I just made fresh tea. Why were you crying?" "I couldn't find my son," Elise sighed heavily, and suddenly, obeying some impulse, she told the strange man everything. He listened to her without interrupting, then asked again, "What's the boy's name? And when was he given to the shelter?" Elise answered, and he frowned. "So what are you going to do now?" the man asked. "I don't know. I'll look for it. Otherwise, why else would I live? I've already lost my son twice, you know." "Elise, my life is no easier than yours. I too was married, and my marriage also failed. My wife ran away from me after I adopted a boy. She lived with us for the first year, took a look, and said she couldn't take it anymore. I used to be the director of an orphanage, the one you went to today. We had a child dropped off. It was a little boy named Tony. I decided to keep him. Later, I quit my job and started farming. Moved over here. So this is where Tony and I live. And in all likelihood, he's your son. Listening to Antonio's story, Elise slowly rose from her chair. Suddenly, a boy ran into the room and stopped when he saw a strange aunt. Elise wept and rushed to the child, and Antonio turned away to the window, hiding his tears. He was glad that the mother had found her child, but he realized that he had lost his son himself. Elise lived with Antonio and Tony for a week. The boy got used to her, but he didn't want to leave his father either. And when Elise tried to put him in the car and take him to town, he ran away and hid somewhere in the backyard. Sobbing, Elise turned to Antonio. He shook his head and went to his son. "I'll be back. I'll definitely come back," Elise shouted through her tears. From afar, Antonio heard the sound of a car and realized that it had left. A few days passed. Elise quit her job, sold everything she could, and was now waiting for buyers for the apartment. Soon, indeed, she heard the bell ring. She went to open the door and was dumbfounded. On the doorstep stood Antonio and Tony. "Mom, we're right behind you," her son told her. "You're coming to live with us, aren't you?" Elise laughed and pointed to the empty apartment. "Of course I'm going. As you can see, I already have everything in my suitcases." All three of them laughed merrily. A year later, a daughter was born to Antonio and Elise, bringing even more happiness to this close-knit, friendly family.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident, especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it." Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. "Do you two know each other?" "Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, 'I'm moving to the sales department soon.' If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it." On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. "It's still working hours." Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. "Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived." I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. "They look good." "What are you talking about?" "These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one?" As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. "Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay?" I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. "Yes, I'm inviting my father." "That's great. I might invite my parents too." I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.